What's up, guys? Welcome back. Today we got UFC 262, Oliveira versus Chandler. We got a pretty good card here. We got Shane Burgos versus Edson Barbosa. Some nuts fights all the way up the card. And just got word from Headline Island that Jacare and Edmund Shabazian has been moved to next weekend for unknown reasons right now. But that kind of sucks because I was pretty confident in Hermanson to get that one done. But nonetheless, we got 12 other fights here that are really good. Starting off the card, we got Soriano taking on Christos Giagos. This one we got Soriano 14-6, 7 TKOs. 4 of his losses are by submission. He's a pretty well-rounded fighter. We usually see him try to strike, look for the knockout. He's a big power puncher. In his fight against Elvin Leon Brito, he grappled him for most of the 5 rounds. That's pretty good top pressure, good body lock takedowns. Submission defense is not all that great, but he was put in many bad positions throughout his career. Has a history of struggling with grapplers like Chaz Skelly, Charles Rosa, a lot of submission losses. On the feet, I would say his best weapon is his lead low kick. He throws that all the time. He switches it up and throws the rear low kick to the head to try to get an unexpected land there. Hands are very powerful, not the most technical though. Likes to get wild with it. Really good right hand, right hook, straight right, all of that. Coming off a 3-fight win streak, 2 of them being TKOs in the first round. So this guy goes out hard. And we got Christos Giagos, 18-8, 7 TKOs. Recently he's been taking most of his fights to decisions. Coming off of a short notice dominant win over Carlton Minus. He had Minus mounted multiple times, dominated the grappling. Go back and look at that Carlton Minus's record. Not the best win to have, but nonetheless, it's good that he at least dominated the fight. I'd say he's primarily a wrestler based on his last 4 fights. High volume of takedowns, 3.11 landed per 15 minutes, which is a ton. Great double legs, single legs, kind of traditional wrestling. Fairly orthodox striking, a lot of straights, doesn't really get too wild with it. Doesn't really get himself in compromised positions. Pretty low output on the feet, though, at 2.88 strikes per minute. And his striking defense is somewhat suspect. Minus was able to kind of jab him apart a lot without any head movement from Iago, so we got to keep an eye on that. He has faced a lot of top-tier competition and lost to them, like Charles Oliveira, Gilbert Burns, Jacare Close, Josh Emmett. Veteran, been in there with a lot of dangerous guys. Soriano, I think he's going to want to keep this one on the feet. It's not that Giagos is a submission threat or anything, but he can probably get a lot of control time. I'd say he has a wrestling advantage here. And Sean should try to work his low kicks, try to win as many rounds as possible, because I think this one will go to a decision. I don't think he's going to knock out Giagos, and if he can kind of work that low kick, he can kind of mitigate the wrestling. If he gets overly wild before, I think Giagos will just kind of duck under and get the takedowns over and over, which I kind of feel like that's going to happen here. First fight on the card, I'm going to predict Christos Giagos by decision. And the odds are not out for this one yet. They just have the Joel Alvarez odds, which I agree with that line as well. But I would guess Christos Giagos somewhere probably around a minus 170, I would say. So, yeah, moving on up the card. Kevin Aguilar taking on Tucker Lutz. Kevin Aguilar 17-4 with 10 TKOs, 2-3 in the UFC. Wins over Enrique Barzola and Rick Glenn. Primary striker for sure, I'd say mainly boxing, extremely heavy hands for the division. A lot of great wins outside the UFC, including a KO win over Damon Jackson. He was basically dominating that fight as well. Split decision win over Tony Kelly. I went back and watched it. It was a banger of a fight, very close. I'd say Tony Kelly's a guy who you should be having a little bit more of a decisive win over. But he has an 87% takedown defense so far in the UFC. He's fought grapplers like Dan Ige. I mean, Dan Ige is pretty well-rounded, but Dan Ige was not able to land all of his takedowns on him. He doesn't shoot from any takedowns himself. He's a pretty low output, low accuracy style of striker, so that's not a lot of strikes landed, but he does have heavy power. Not really been out grappled yet. Usually the fights that he does lose, he's just not outlanding his opponents. He's just kind of getting outlanded by them. So that's something to keep an eye on for sure. Tucker Lutz, 11-1, 6 TKOs, coming off the Dana White Contender Series win over Sherrard Blackledge. Landed 4 takedowns in this fight. Definitely a primary grappler, but from what we have seen from his striking, fairly high output, 4.33 significant strikes per minute. And he landed 96 strikes against Chase Gibson in his first fight on the Contender Series. Very orthodox striking, a lot of straight punches, low kicks, doesn't really get wild. I'd say his speed isn't really the best. He's going to have a hard time landing on Aguilar, I'm predicting, because Aguilar has been in there with a lot of fast strikers. I don't really think Tucker Lutz has that speed. Not really finished any very high-level opponents, takes most of his opponents to decisions, but they are pretty high-level wins. This is a big step up in competition for Lutz for sure. Kevin, on the other hand, hasn't really been looking good recently. He's on a 3-fight losing streak, and he was at 1.17-1. Like, this guy was coming up and was kind of the next big thing, very promising. He should be able to avoid the ground game of Lutz, I'm predicting. His 87% takedown defense is definitely going to play a role in this one. On the feet, I would guess that Kevin will have an advantage here, but if the higher output of Tucker Lutz can take over, I wouldn't really be surprised if this plays out close on the feet. All in all, I'd say I'm going to pick the more experienced fighter, the guy who's been in the UFC for longer, Kevin Aguilar, to get it done by decision. It's not a confident pick at all. I believe it's close to even odds here. Yeah, pretty close to even odds. Tucker Lutz actually moving up. I get it, he's a grappler, but I'm going to side with Kevin Aguilar. Not a confident pick at all. Not enough value there for me to bet on that. So moving on up, we got Gina Mazany taking on Cachorro. Not really the highest level of fight here, but it's whatever. We got a great main event. Gina Mazany 7-4, 3 TKOs, coming off that TKO win over Rachel Ostovich. She does her best work on the ground, I would say. 68% takedown rate, very strong in the clinch. Not all that great striking, but does have a good jab, keeps her distance well, works the body sometimes, which is good with straight punches. Pretty good cardio, can definitely push a pace into the third round, as we saw that third round TKO over Rachel Ostovich. Sometimes moves in while striking and keeps her head on the center line while doing this. This is kind of sketchy. She's coming up against a power puncher, against Cachorro here. And she's 9-3, 1-3 in the UFC, 5 TKOs on her record. She did face Antonina Shevchenko, struggled against the grappling of Molly McCann. I'd say she's definitely a primary striker, and she's going to have the higher output in this matchup for sure. Not very technical on the feet, however. A lot of wild hooks. She kind of reminds me of Ariane Carnelossi that we saw a couple weeks ago, except not as good ground game, not as technical on the feet either, but does kind of go out there and brawl. And she got Shayna Dobson out of there in the first round with an uppercut. Again, not really that surprising, not really an impressive win, but at least she's finishing her, I suppose. Takedown defense, 69%. Knocked down by Luana Carolina, which is kind of sketchy. Luana Carolina is not a power puncher by any means. More of a volume striker, if anything. And she has a weird stance, kind of hunched over, leaning close into her opponent. And I just think that Gina will be able to jab her face apart if she's going to come in there with that stance. You can see that stance in all of her fights. It's just really weird. Really just not favorable for, winning decisions either. And the grappling should also be there for Gina. I think she'll be able to take her down. Definitely be the more technical striker on the feet. One of the more confident picks, but then again, we've seen crazy things happen to women and women's MMA. I'm not super confident in this one either. But that's the third fight. I'm going to go Gina by decision, sitting at -210. I kind of agree with that, but at this point, you never know. Moving on up, interesting one here in my opinion, Jamie Pickett versus Jordan Wright. Jamie Pickett 11-5, 8 TKOs, 0-1 in the UFC, coming off of a dominant loss to Tafon Shukwi. Jamie's a primary striker, pretty good wrestling in his back pocket if he needs it. Took down Jonathan Bhatti and Tafon Shukwi with a double leg. Not really a submission threat though. Really big and athletic guy. I've seen fights in the past where he did backflips off the cage. I don't think I've seen a 185er ever do that. And he throws a lot of single punches. Landed a huge combo on Jonathan, but most of the time he's just throwing single punches. Lead sidekick to the body. Stops his opponents that way. TKO lost to, or actually it was a decision loss to Punahele Soriano. Just really got out wrestled in that one. And a submission loss to Charles Byrd, which is somewhat sketchy, I would say. Charles Byrd, not like the highest level guy. Definitely gassed out very badly against Tafon Shukwi, and it wasn't like the pace was anything crazy in this fight. It wasn't like he was getting wrestled or having to wrestle. It was a striking battle, really, and he gassed out anyway. So we got Jordan Wright coming in here, 11-1, 6 TKOs, 5 submissions. Finished all of his wins, and almost all of them come in the first round. Coming off the KO loss to Joaquin Buckley, possibly was a little, of a mental lapse in there, I would say. I feel like he, wasn't that bad of a fighter compared to Buckley. I feel like it could have been a closer fight, but just got KO'd in the second. Record is mostly cans, but his recent fights have been against decent levels of competition. Has a KO loss to Anthony Hernandez, which was overturned, but Anthony Hernandez, not really a guy you want to be getting KO'd against, especially in the first round. His chin and striking defense are both not that great. Leaves his chin sky high when coming in, especially. Can't really strike while moving backwards, which is a big issue. And he has trouble against the fence, I would say. Best part of his game, I'd say, is his dynamic striking. Throws a lot of different things. A lot of difficult attacks like spinning kicks, head kicks, things like this. Really good lateral movement, though. Good in the offensive position in the clinch, like against Ike Villanueva. And Jamie Pickett's going to have a big reach advantage here of 3 inches. I think he needs to use it. I think he's the harder hitter. Definitely puts himself in compromising positions at times. Has trouble composing himself. And I think he should keep this fight standing, try to get Jordan out of there early. Jordan's cardio isn't really known, but I would imagine it's better than Jamie's because Jamie's is just horrible. And I think Jordan will get better as the fight goes on. I think he's going to be able to compose himself. He wastes time on the feet, just kind of moving, pretty low output kind of guy, but I think he's going to be a little bit higher than Jamie in this fight. It's such a hard one to predict, but I think that if Jamie does gas out, I think Jordan Wright will definitely finish him late, and that's if Jordan Wright doesn't gas out as well. Again, another unconfident pick on the card, which is kind of the theme of this card. I'm going with Jordan Wright by TKO in the third. Right now, it's even odds all across the board. I get it. Both fighters haven't really proved themselves. Both are kind of coming off of not great losses to have, so I can see that. Look at all these fights, by the way, just all in the 100s. Such a close card. I think this is a bad betting card because there's not really big value on underdogs and there's not really a lot of confident picks either, so not really sure what I'm going to do as far as betting goes, but we'll see. Next fight on the card, we got Andrea Lee taking on Antonina Shevchenko. Andrea Lee 11-5 with 4 submissions, coming off 3-fight losing streak actually. Joanne Calderwood, Lauren Murphy, Roxanne Modafferi. Roxanne fight was concerning for me because she just kind of got dominated in the grappling. She did start off fairly strong, throwing her strikes and combinations. Not really connecting on many, but giving her a lot of different looks, kind of getting the nod on the judges' scorecard by just throwing stuff out there. Landed a few head throw takedowns as well, faded as the fight went on. And Roxanne was able to secure over 4 minutes of control time. Like I said, that's kind of the concerning part of this one. Very high output on the feet, 5.58 significant strikes landed per minute. Not really the fastest or most powerful striker. Throws to the legs, head, body, mixes up her combinations, mixes up her attacks. She can definitely hang in there with average level strikers and beat them for sure, but she does go for takedowns in most of her fights. That's kind of where she thrives, is on the ground. Not the best wrestler, I would say. Pretty decent takedowns, but not amazing takedowns. Good top pressure. Really high submission attempt output, though, from her. Antonina Shevchenko, 9-2, 3 TKOs. Coming off that fairly impressive win over Ariane Lipsky, she kind of dominated this fight in the grappling, which was not expected. And she has very good striking defense, Muay Thai style of fighter, outlands her opponents by more than double in most of her fights. Lands takedowns at very opportune times to avoid, barrages or just crazy attacks that might be thrown at her, or counter takedowns. Really intelligent fighter, never been submitted. Not the great takedown defense, though, as seen against Roxanne. She got taken down 5 times, which is sketchy. Seems to just patch these holes. Ariane was never able to take her down. She seems a little bit more composed in the takedown defense department nowadays. Really dynamic striker on the feet, strong clinch, cage control. I think that Andrea Lee could have success in the grappling in this fight. We've seen Antonina struggle against grapplers, but I feel like her path to getting the takedown is going to be very difficult because she likes to grab a hold of her opponents and clinch in the upper body rather than shooting for a wrestling style of takedown. This is going to be really hard for her to land because Antonina is very strong in the clinch and great clinch takedowns of her own. I think she'll just kind of counter takedown her if Andrea tries to get a hold of her that way. I feel like Antonina should be able to just use her rangy style and clinch when she finds it necessary on the feet to kind of win this fight. And I just think she's a much better fighter, to be honest. I could be wrong here, but one of the more confident picks on the card, I'm going to go Antonina Shevchenko by TKO in the 3rd round. I think, we saw Andrea Lee somewhat gas against Roxanne. I think if that happens here, she's going to get finished against a dynamic striker like Antonina. And the line here, let's check it out. -140. That might be my only spot I'm taking on this card. This card's just, for me, it's bad for betting. Again, like I mentioned, not really huge value on any underdogs, not really any confident picks either. It's just a bad betting card all around. But I think I'm going to take that spot there. Moving on up. This is one of the more anticipated fights on the card for me. A lot of question marks surrounding this. Lando Vannata taking on Mike Grundy. Lando Vannata 11-5 and 5 submissions. Fighter that can do pretty much nearly everything, coming down to 145 for this fight. He took down Bobby Green 4 times during their first fight. Has an average takedown accuracy of 1.13 per 15 minutes across his UFC fights. He dropped Tony Ferguson, and this was a prime Tony Ferguson. This was about 5-7 years ago, something like that. Great spinning wheel kick KO over John Makdessi. Pretty unorthodox on the feet, dynamic striking game, a lot of unexpected strikes. Tends to dip his head a bit when mixing up his striking techniques, and Bobby Green is able to take advantage of that, catch him, drop him a couple times. He has 5.1 significant strikes absorbed per minute, which is not good. And this is very clear in his most recent fight, the Bobby Green rematch, like I mentioned. Bobby Green outlanded him by double, dropped him twice, landed 3 takedowns with 3 minutes of control time. He does have good guillotine attempts from bottom position, pretty good jiu-jitsu all around the board. Tough run in the UFC for sure, but has mainly lost to high-level opponents. Mike Grundy, 12-2, 8 submissions, 1-1 in the UFC, TKO win over Nadin Armani, and a decision loss to Movsar Evloev. Based off these 2 wins, really can't get a lot of details from him because these are, everyone expected him to win against Nadin Armani. No one really expected him to win against Movsar Evloev. He's definitely primarily a wrestler. Good offensive submissions like arm triangles, Darce chokes, Americanas. Showed a very, very low output on the feet in both his UFC fights. You can tell he's just very uncomfortable on the feet. His footwork is pretty good. Moves in, moves out good. Lacks head movement at times, though, which is big. And he was jabbed apart, hit with some huge left hands by Movsar. He did have Movsar in a choke that almost ended it. It was extremely tight. Imagine if he landed that choke, he'd be a minus 400 in this fight. So just kind of shows the bias there. His main weapon on the feet is his overhand right. Nice left hook as well. Doesn't have a wide range of techniques, very little kicks. Not the most dynamic striker. Very, very orthodox with low output. His takedowns are amazing. A lot of double legs and single legs. Uses strikes to set these up. Sometimes goes in without a setup, which can be dangerous. I feel like Mike should be able to land takedowns almost whenever he wants in this fight based on, Lando Vannata not really looking great in the wrestling against Bobby Green. And Bobby Green is not really known as the wrestler, was able to just out-wrestle him. So I think Mike Grundy should be able to. And if he won't be able to keep Lando down, the striking is not where he wants to be against Lando. Lando has a very awkward style, can definitely be hard to handle. And I feel like to win this fight, he should try to hit Mike with something big early on. Land a huge shot that was shown to make him tentative against Movsar Evloev. Got hit with a huge right hand, then decided to not shoot him for any more takedowns. So if Lando can do that, he can kind of help make it a striking battle where he's definitely going to have a really good chance to win this. But I just feel like the takedowns should be there for Grundy for sure. And I feel like he should just be able to keep landing them over and over. Maybe he patched some holes in his stand-up game, who knows, but it's a very, very close fight. I'm going to go with Mike Grundy by decision. I think he's a slight favorite right now at minus 125, minus 130. I don't see any value there. It's such a close fight. Moving up, we got Matt Schnell versus Rogerio Bontorin. Matt Schnell's 15-5 with 8 submissions, 5-3 in the UFC. All his losses are by TKO in the first round. Coming off of that very close but impressive fight against Tyson Nam. Primarily a boxer on the feet, great combos, great speed, great jab. He usually throws a lot of combinations rather than one strike alone. Overwhelms his opponents with volume. Not a ton of power on his shots, though. Definitely susceptible to being countered like we saw against Pantoja. And that fight with Pantoja was just a firefight. Got wobbled very early on before getting finished. And he has a submission win over Jordan Espinoza and Luis Smolka. Not the greatest wrestler, though. Only landed 2 takedowns across 8 UFC fights. Has a 33% takedown accuracy, 53% takedown defense. He is a huge flyweight, though, 5'8" with a 70-inch reach, which is definitely, I think, going to play a role in this fight. Rogerio Bontorin is 16-3 with 11 submissions, 2-2 in the UFC. He has great wins outside the UFC over 13-0 and 21-5 record opponents. Strong in the clinch, decent wrestling, does his best work when the fight gets to the mat, excellent top pressure control submissions. He had Kai Kara-France in a body triangle basically for the whole first round before getting knocked out. He did get dominated by Rayborg, taken down 10 times, only landed 9 strikes the whole fight. Most of his submissions are by rear naked chokes. Also has some arm bars and heel hooks in there. I wouldn't say his striking is very excellent, but he does throw with power, and he can tend to leave his head wide open. I think Rogerio will have the advantage in the grappling here if he can get the fight there. That will be his path to victory, but on the feet, it's going to be hard for him. Schnell's a much longer guy. He's going to be throwing constant combinations. Schnell will want to keep this one standing, I feel like, and be ready for the takedowns. I feel like Schnell's grappling is it's good, but I feel like people are kind of slightly overrating it here in this matchup. I think he's going to want to keep this one standing. He'll be the better fighter on the feet. And definitely going to want to throw those combinations to keep Rogerio back and just kind of, maybe if he can't get the combinations going, maybe just jab him apart because he is going to have the distance on him. And I'm going to take Matt Schnell by decision in this one. But this is not, again, not a confident pick. This card's insane. And I'd say the value actually here is on Rogerio Bontorin. I don't think Matt Schnell should be a minus 170, minus 160 in this fight. I think this fight's very close. Imagine if Rogerio Bontorin did not get knocked out against Kai Kara-France and instead maybe backpacked him for 2 more rounds and won a decision. He would be like a minus 240 favorite in this fight, So he is coming off that KO loss. It was not too long ago. I think three months max. So that's a quick turnaround for getting KO'd like that, but that's kind of why I'm going to pick Schnell in this one, but it's a very, very, very close fight. Next fight, Jacare Souza versus Andre Muniz. This is kind of a sad one to me. Jacare is just so old now, 26-9, 14 submissions, 41 years old, coming off of a 3-fight losing streak. Decent wins, or recent wins over Chris Weidman, Derek Brunson, Vitor Belfort. These are all great wins. Recent fights hasn't really been looking too good, coming off that KO loss to Kevin Holland, which he just didn't move his head. He just kind of stood there and accepted the strikes, which was very odd. Before this, lost a decision to Blachowicz. Should have been unanimous. He just got destroyed in this fight, basically taken down 3 times by Jack Hermanson in their fight as well, and got outstruck by more than double. Takedowns are almost always initiated through the clinch first. He likes to do a lot of work in the clinch as well, strikes, just getting some control time. His striking's not really great. He does throw with a lot of power, very low output, not a lot of speed on these, especially at this age. Likes throwing overhand rights after his jab, then low kicks, 2.53 significant strikes per minute, so a very low output here. Usual game plan is to get a hold of his opponents, get them to the cage, find a takedown, find a submission. And he's going to struggle to carry out that game plan against Andre Muniz, who is also an elite BJJ black belt here. 20-4, 13 submissions. All 4 losses are by TKO. On the feet, he is even more low output than Jacare. Very slow punches, not a whole lot of power. He had Antonio Arroyo in a deep armbar, showed good chain wrestling in this fight. Coming off the quick win over Bartosz Fabinski via armbar. 37% takedown defense. Doesn't have a lot of fights in the UFC, so it's kind of hard to put a lot of stock into that number. Usually welcomes the takedown anyway because of his high level jiu-jitsu. And Jacare will, I feel like, have a small advantage in the striking and clinch. This could be mitigated by his age. His speed is not there anymore. His killer instinct is just not there anymore. I would imagine that jiu-jitsu is close, but I think Jacare should have the better wrestling by a bit. If he decides to get this one on the ground or the feet, he should be able to dictate where the fight goes. I'm going to take Andre Muniz, however. I think that this is going to be a very, very sad fight to watch. I think Andre Muniz is just going to kind of jab his way into the clinch, show us that Jacare isn't as good as we all thought anymore, kind of win in the clinch. If this fight gets to the ground, I think he could honestly submit Jacare. Jacare has been gassing out as well recently. So I'm going to take the younger guy, Andre Muniz, to win this one. Kind of wish he was... he is kind of plus money here, but not really. It's almost even odds, I would say. Some sites have Souza as the more of the favorite, but yeah, I'm going to take Andre Muniz. Kind of a sad matchup there for me. Next fight, best fight on the card, hands down. This is my pick for fight of the night. Shane Burgos taking on Edson Barbosa. I've been going back and forth on this one. Shane Burgos, 13-2, 5 TKOs, 5 submissions. He can do it all. 6-2 in the UFC, coming off that decision loss to Josh Emmett. I would say he's a primarily striker because that's kind of just where he decides to keep the fight most of the time. And I would argue that he has the best jab in the division, hands down. It's fast, it's powerful, it finds a target every time. In the Emmett fight, he showed that he is susceptible to the overhand right, keeps his hands low, poor striking defense in general, I would say, but extremely tough and durable. Probably the highest output, I would argue, in the UFC at 7.31 significant strikes per minute, which is insane. And it's not like this guy has one UFC fight. I believe he has 6 or 7 fights, or no, he has 8 fights, which makes this even more ridiculous. Absorbs almost as much at 5.81 significant strikes. So Shane Burgos is kind of the perfect example of a fighter who's going to get fight of the nights. He's just it's all action. Very proficient in the wrestling as well. 100% takedown accuracy, 89% takedown defense. Doesn't really use it as much, but it is effective when he does decide to use it. He was outlanding Calvin Kattar slightly before the TKO came, which isn't a surprise if you look at his striking output. Edson Barbosa, 21-9, 12 TKOs. Everyone knows him at this point. 2-5 in his last 7 fights. Been a part of a lot of split decisions that I feel like he should have won. And he's been fluctuating between weight classes. I'm not going to try to make excuses for him or anything, but he still looked great in his most recent fight against Makwan Amirkhani. Elite kickboxer, doesn't really initiate a lot of wrestling or clinch scenarios. Prefers to strike at range. Uses his high-level kicks to the body, to the legs. We know him for his leg kick. Very, very fast hands, impressive power in his right hand. Outstanding striking defense as well. Coming off that win over Makwan. Fairly low output from both men during this fight, which does kind of concern me. He's getting up there in age, 34 years old now. We're seeing his output slowly trail downwards. Edson did fight a very smart fight. I think he lowered his output to try to deal with the wrestling of Makwan. Picked his opening, secured 2 takedowns himself. And, 2 knockdowns. He got taken down a couple times, but Makwan wasn't really able to do anything with him. Edson has a great get-up game. 78% takedown defense after 11 years in the UFC. I feel like his path to victory here is try to get the leg kicks going early and hard to mitigate the jab from Burgos. That's definitely going to be coming. Both fighters are orthodox fighters. This should make Edson's rear leg kick that much more effective, if you think about it. Shane has the wrestling he can go to, but I don't know if he's going to be able to get takedowns against Edson. If he is, I think he should try to use it early to kind of set the pace, maybe gas Edson out a little bit. Shane does have the cardio advantage in this fight for sure. And I think Shane definitely could output Edson on the feet, has a higher output historically. But Edson's going to be throwing so many different weapons at him constantly. This fight's going to be absolutely insane. Beginning of the week, I started out on Edson Barbosa. After I kind of looked more into the striking numbers of Shane Burgos, I decided to go with him by decision. This fight could go either way. It could be a split decision. It could be... I don't really see a finish. Both guys are extremely durable. But I'm going to side with Shane Burgos here to get the win. I was surprised he was the favorite, but not anymore. I kind of realized should be able to land that jab at will. Has the takedowns, has the toughness, durability. Minus 130 on some sites, minus 115. Again, this fight is just so hard to bet. If you guys have any betting tips, let me know, because so far I'm just going with Antonina Shevchenko on my betting cards. I don't really see anything else here with value. Next fight on the card. Pretty interesting one here, but I think I got a pretty good read on it. Viviane Araujo taking on Katlyn Chookagian. Viviane, 10-2, 4 submissions, 4-1 UFC record. Has a loss to Jessica Eye. Has landed at least 2 takedowns in all of her fights except against Montana De La Rosa. So that kind of tells us a lot because she can take all her opponents down. She didn't want to go to the ground with Montana because of the submission game, I feel like. Prefers to take the fight to the ground, hunt for submissions if she can. Also able to keep heavy top pressure the whole fight. When she does lose or get close fights, it tends to be when she's getting outputted again by her opponents. She has a decently high output, but absorbs a lot of those strikes that her opponents throw back at her. I'd say her best strike is her leg kick. She kind of spams it a lot, which is always nice to see. Her boxing is decent, but can be sloppy at times. High output, moderate accuracy. Clinch work is above average for sure, I would say. Pretty strong reversals against the cage. A lot of takedown attempts from this position. She kind of just is coming off that dominant win over Roxanne Modafferi, which, I mean, you would expect, but still somewhat impressive to dominate a grappler in the grappling, I guess. Katlyn Chookagian, 15-4, 8-4 in the UFC. She's fought the best of the best, lost to some, but has impressive wins over Irene Aldana, Cynthia Calvillo, Jennifer Maia, and Joanne Calderwood. Definitely a primary striker, but has a 51% takedown defense. This kind of looks a little salty on paper, but it's actually really, really good. She's faced a lot of high-level wrestlers her whole career and was able to defend some of their takedowns. Very, very fast 1-2, great boxing. Throws a lot of good body kicks, like against Cynthia Calvillo. That kind of shows she wasn't scared of getting taken down either. She's throwing body kicks against a wrestler. Definitely a hand thrower, though, for sure. Whenever she gets taken down, gets right back up. Great get-up game. Never been submitted before. 12 or 15 wins come by decision. Some people see this as a bad thing. Here in this matchup, I kind of see this as a good thing, though. Great cardio, great durability. Not really hunting for submissions, but playing the fight smart, trying to get the win. High output striker. Not really a high striking percentage, though. Kind of misses a lot of shots, but she makes her opponents miss as well. Great lateral movement. I feel like Katlyn should keep this one standing at all costs. I feel like she definitely should be able to. Has defended takedowns from the best female grapplers in the UFC for sure. I think she should be able to defend Viviane's. I guess this could play out close on the feet if Viviane decides to prioritize the low kick, take away Katlyn's movement, try to work into the clinch. But at the end of the day, I really think Katlyn Chookagian is going to be a step ahead here. I think she's faced the better competition, which forced her to get better. And I just think that Viviane is not on the level of fighters that Katlyn's been losing to. I'm going to take Katlyn Chookagian by decision here. This might be a good spot, honestly, minus 140. Both these are women's fights that I'm thinking about betting on, which is very, very sketch. You know how that goes. But they're probably two of the more confident places on the card for me. Katlyn Chookagian by decision. Moving up. Rest in peace. This fight, one of the better fights on the card. Move to next week. I guess I'll break it down next week, but just to give you my early prediction, I was going to go with Jacare by TKO in the third round. I don't think that the cardio of Edmond is something that he can really fix right now. Cardio is a lot genetic. He probably patched some of the holes with it, but I think that Hermansson has ridiculous cardio, never really slows down. I think he's just going to probably get Edmond down at some point. And from what we've seen from Jack Hermansson, he does try to prioritize ground and pound over submission. So I say, okay, it's going to probably come in the third round. I guess he's probably going to get a TKO win in the third. I don't see my pick changing for this next week, but I'll go ahead and break it down in a more in-depth way for whenever this fight's rescheduled. Next fight, pretty fun fight here. Tony Ferguson taking on Beneil Dariush. Everyone knows T-Ferg at this point, 25-5, 12 TKOs, coming off 2 dominant losses in a row to Gaethje and Oliveira. Fighter who can do it all for sure, unorthodox on the feet, gets crazy with it, lands with a high output, 5.46 significant strikes per minute, which is pretty much incomprehensible at this rate in his career. He's been in the UFC for, I think, over 20 fights at this point. Impressive jiu-jitsu from all positions, submission wins over Edson Barbosa, Kevin Lee. Great elbows from bottom position, likes to slice his opponents up. Probably the best cardio in the UFC, I would say, maybe right behind Colby or right behind Merab. It's up there in the top 5 for sure. Good footwork, spinning attacks, just gets pretty wild with it at times. Poor striking defense, I would say, but he does have one of the best chins in the UFC. He gets dropped a lot, but his chin is off the charts for sure. He doesn't really go to his wrestling that much, actually, at least his offensive wrestling. Last time he landed a takedown was against Gleason Tebow in 2015. He's shown a sharp decline since the Pettis fight, in my opinion, in his speed. You could see it in the Pettis fight. Pettis was just the first to land. He was just a lot faster than Toney, and Toney really had to kind of go off on angles to try to get in. He's a smart fighter, I would say. I think he's just losing some speed. His killer instinct isn't there anymore. Kind of sad to see. Tony Ferguson is my favorite fighter, but you can't ignore the decline here. Beneil Dariush, I kind of feel like this is a tailor-made matchup for Toney Ferguson, but just wait to see what I have to say. Beneil's 20-4, 8 submissions, 3 of his losses coming by TKO. Very, very high-level grappler, BJJ black belt. Extremely proficient wrestling. Coming off the impressive win over Diego Ferreira. I feel like this fight shouldn't have been a split decision. I think he won decisively. And the Gregor-Gillespie fight makes this even more impressive because Gregor was able to scramble with Diego Ferreira and struggled, though. Diego reversed position so many times, had him in a few, light submission attempts, but Diego put up a much better fight against Gregor than he did against Beneil, which makes Beneil's performance way more impressive, in my opinion. He has bombs in his hands, coming off of 2 basically stiff KO wins over Jacare Close and Scott Holtzman. He definitely can get baited into slugfest very often, I'd say in his last 3 fights. He can let technicality kind of fly out the door, slug away. Poor striking defense during these exchanges, kind of gets wobbled a lot. We saw this against Diego Ferreira as well. Jacare Close basically almost knocked him out on the feet. And I'd say his best weapon in the grappling is his body triangle. Goes to this often, tries to just backpack people or kind of just lay on the ground, land strikes, hunt for rear nakeds, things like that. I think Toney should want to keep his one standing at all costs. I think the pure wrestling of Daryush is better than that of Oliveira's. And we saw what Oliveira was just able to ragdoll Toney for 3 rounds. I think Toney will have a small advantage on the feet here. But it's one of those spots where I don't think we're going to know this until fight night. If Beneil strikes composed, I think he could have a slight advantage. But if Beneil goes out there and engages in a slugfest, this will definitely favor Toney. He's definitely the more crafty striker. Has kind of unexpected power as well. And I think what Beneil should try to do in this fight is work to the clinch, try to get the takedowns from there. Because Toney is known for his dark chokes for wrestlers who try to shoot on the legs. And Beneil's been submitted before. I think that's his path to victory here. Like I said, the reason why I feel like this is a tailor-made matchup for Toney, and the UFC is trying to get him a win at all costs, is because Beneil has been sucked into so many firefights like that, is known to kind of let his technicality go out the door. I'd say he does have a good chin, actually, but striking defense is very, very poor at times. If Toney's going to get a win, it's over Daryush, if anyone in the top 10. However, I just can't trust Toney after the decline we've seen. I'm going to pick Daryush by decision. I think he's just going to wrestle Toney for 3 rounds, and I don't think there's going to be much more to this fight. I would love to see Toney get a win. Like I mentioned, he's my favorite fighter, but I definitely think Beneil is deserving of this line. I know he opened as a slight underdog, which is crazy, but here we got minus 160. I could see that for sure. Moving on up. Insane fight here. Michael Chandler versus Charles Oliveira. Michael Chandler, 22-5, 10 TKOs, 1-0 in the UFC, coming off that KO win over Dan Hooker. He's got powerful hands, great straight right, and a great 1-2. Oftentimes throws in single strikes rather than in combination, though. Very fast, powerful body kick. Goes to that quite often. But sometimes while throwing this kick, he can kind of get put off balance with a jab or maybe just get countered easily in some way. His wrestling is the most impressive part of his game. Insane top control, takedowns, suplexes, double legs. That's what we see him use all the time. Many impressive submission wins as well, mostly earlier on in his career, but we know that he has it in his back pocket if he needs it. Comes out very hard in the first round almost all the time, which can kind of lead to his cardio issues across 5 rounds. Great forward pressure, though, always pushing his opponents against the cage, just walking them down. 3 losses by TKO. I'd say there's definitely holes in his striking defense. Doesn't really defend too well when his opponents pressure him back. He likes to be the guy moving forward. Doesn't really work well moving when he's forced to move backwards, which is going to be a key role in this fight. Charles Oliveira, 30-8 with 19 submissions, which is a crazy ratio right there. 4 of his losses are by TKO, coming off that dominant win over Toney, like I said. Before this, 3rd round guillotine over Kevin Lee. If you go back and watch that fight, Kevin Lee was winning, but it was only a matter of time. If Kevin's path to victory is to wrestle against a guy like Charles, he's going to get submitted at some point. On the feet, he likes to pressure his opponents back to the cage as well. Like we saw in the Kevin Lee fight. Kevin Lee was basically circling around the outside of the cage foot almost on the fence the whole time. Doesn't really work off the counter too much. He is actually kind of open to being countered, on the contrary, but wide array of kicks, spinning back kicks, leg kicks a lot. He's the stereotypical grappler with a heavy kick game. I love to see it. It's so effective. Very fast and technical jab. Other than his jab, his hands aren't really that impressive, but he does throw with a lot of power. Definitely a wizard on the ground. Great sweeps. Always attempting a submission. Really sick armbar to triangles transitions. Very high takedown output. 2.64 landed per 15 minutes. I'd say in this fight, neither guy is super high output on the feet. Charles Oliveira can easily be taken down by high-level wrestlers like we saw against Kevin Lee. I think Chandler can and will take him down in this fight. But I think he should be hesitant to do so. The submissions are going to be just a nuisance on the ground for sure. On the feet, both guys like forward pressure. I'm going to say this right now. I think that's going to be the deciding factor in this fight. Whoever's going to have more luck pressing forward is going to win the striking exchanges, because both guys don't really like moving backwards. They both like forward pressure. Oliver is going to need to keep his head moving while pumping his jab out there and low kick out there. Chandler should try to find the right hand and body kick early. I think his best path to victory is actually to get Oliveira out of there early. Oliveira not always known as the fastest starter, but Chandler is. I think he could kind of use that discrepancy to his advantage. And I think it could play out pretty close in both areas. I think the stronger wrestler is obviously Chandler. The stronger striker, I'd have to give the edge to Chandler, but I think Oliveira is going to have luck with his distance management and his range. He's going to have more reach than Chandler. I just think whoever's going to be the guy moving around the outside of the cage is going to lose this one. In the grappling exchanges, which there will be some, I'm predicting the initiator is probably going to be Chandler. And I feel like if he's going to go in here initiating grappling exchanges during every single round, then we're going to see a submission win for Charles Oliveira. But I think Chandler could get this one done on the feet. Depends where this fight goes. Depends where Chandler keeps it. I think the outcome is in Chandler's hands more than it is in Oliveira's. But what are the odds that Chandler goes out there and decides not to wrestle, decides not to use the primary staple of his game against a guy like Oliveira, who doesn't really have the greatest takedown defense? I think Chandler will try to use that. I think he's going to think that his jiu-jitsu's good enough to keep his neck out of the guillotine of Oliveira, but I don't think it is. I think I've been going back and forth on this one as well. Ultimately, I'm going to side with Charles Oliveira by round 3 submission. I feel like Oliveira might have the better cardio here as well. We have seen Chandler fade, kind of put his head in compromising positions, like against Benson Henderson in their 5-rounder. He kind of just wrestled in the 4th round, kind of laid and prayed, but I don't think that's going to fly against a guy like Oliveira. I'm rooting for Chandler. I want him to win. I think this would be an amazing kind of story. Coming over from Bellator, 2 fights, became the champ. It would be insane to see him win. But I'm going to go with Charles Oliveira. Somewhat surprised that he's not a big favorite, but I think this fight should kind of be even odds. But yeah, that's about all I got so far. I don't really have a good read on any of these fights. So take everything I say with a few grains of salt. Just so many close fights on this card. Check out these odds, all in the 100s except Gina Mazany, which Gina Mazany is not even my most confident pick. So all like below minus 150. This card is nuts. I think we're going to see a lot of unexpected outcomes. Don't be surprised if your pick rates are not good this card. They're probably not going to be. And if they are, you probably got a little lucky. Just to kind of recap the whole thing, going with Christos Giagos by decision, Kevin Aguilar decision, Gina Mazany decision, Jordan Wright round 3 TKO, Antonina Shevchenko round 3 TKO, Mike Grundy decision, Matt Schnell decision, Andre Muniz decision, Shane Burgos decision, Katlyn Chookagian decision. I'm so sad that this fight's off. This is one of my more confident picks, one of my favorite fights on the card as well, but I was going to go with Jacare by third round TKO, Beneil Dariush by decision, and Oliveira by round 3 submission.